Hello, all praise to Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So, what does a cult do to your brain? I want to take you on a sort of a short history of the Q movement and then get into some propaganda and how the thought process moved along. So we know how we got here. So, back in sort of the US election, let's say, it was known that Hillary Clinton was involved in some bad things, and it was thought by the people on the right side of politics. Let's say when I say the extreme right, I don't mean extreme right. I mean, how to define it properly? The people who, like, not just the people who voted Republican, but the people who sort of knew a bit more, let's say, and were more involved in the conspiracy type stuff. And we're aware that Hillary Clinton was involved in some bad stuff, and that she, you know, there were a bunch of scandals that were known about before the election, and it was thought that it was a big deal. The election was a big deal because in the world the world was moving towards communism, towards the the leftist point of view, and censorship was. I don't think it had really been too bad yet at that point. I can't remember, but it was going in the wrong direction. Things were getting bad, and it was felt that Trump was the savior at that point. Like, it was sort of the last chance. If America didn't elect a good leader at that point, then things were going to go bad because Hillary Clinton was not a good choice at all. And so it was a big deal for the people on 4chan, for example, that Trump got in. And so they fought what they called the first meme war, and they really pushed hard for Donald Trump to win. And they did a lot of memes, a lot of things. They got organized and really pushed hard to get. Well, I don't know if that was the first meme war or if Brexit was the first. I don't know. My 4chan. I'm not a 4chaner, but the point is that the people on 4chan and Poll were behind. Got behind Trump and made a lot of propaganda, you might say, to support Trump. So then after the election, after Trump won, the left didn't give up. And it was the second time in recent history that the left hadn't given up after a loss. So Brexit would be the first, where the left just basically refused to lose. There was the referendum, and they didn't accept the outcome. And the election in America was the second one. I remember on the first day after the election, when the results came in, there were already protests. And the left never gave in. They never accepted the loss. And so over the year 2017, it sort of became more and more important that Trump drain the swamp and Trump win, because we could see that the left, those who were watching, we could see the left were getting worse and worse, and there seemed to be no other option than Trump needed to come through on his promise to drain the swamp. And in his initial phase in government, he'd done a lot of good things. It seemed like things were going in the right direction. Then Qanon came along in late 2017. It was on Poll, I believe. It was on 4chan, and started posting information about what was supposedly an operation behind the scenes to clean up the deep state. But just posting information, and the people on 4chan, being the type of people who are not very trustworthy, looked into the things that were being said, and they seemed to be truth there. But at the beginning, the QAnon stuff in the beginning, it was not as big as it is now, basically. Now, I wasn't on Poll. I don't go to 4chan, and I only heard about Q a bit later on in 2018. It had already moved to 8chan by that point, by the time I got into it. But the point is that it was a relatively small-scale conspiracy. We already knew that Hillary Clinton was corrupt, and there were corrupt people in politics, let's say. And so it was no surprise to us that the information that was being given initially, and it was a bit more extreme. A lot of people in government worship Satan, and then in the initial phases of Q, we thought that, like, we as in the people following Q, thought that something big was going to happen imminently, and it was going to be a big change in society. So a bunch of bad people were going to get arrested and that type of thing. And there's a picture I'll put up on the screen. This was made, I don't know when this was made, but fairly early on in the movement. We're talking February, March, somewhere around that time, 2018. I actually sent this to a few people because at that time it was believed that it was imminently going to be some big thing happen and a bunch of people were going to get arrested, and it was perhaps martial law going to be put in briefly. And but at that time we thought it was just like some people in not just America, but it was globally, but we didn't realize the scale of what was going on at that time. So you'll see this thing, urgent message, please pay attention. No matter what race, gender, or religion you are, no matter who you voted for, whatever, even if you hate Donald Trump, da-da-da-da-da. And you can read it. If you want to read it, you can pause it. But I guess the point is, like, what we thought was sort of what was summed up here. Very soon, terrible news will spread. It will seem impossible to believe. Horrible, sickening, unbelievable things will shake your world and may turn everything you believe upside down. So at that point in time, we were sort of prepared for something big to happen, and this was just a continuation of what had already been happening with the left versus right, and the communist threat, and Hillary Clinton and Obama and all this stuff, and all this new stuff was coming out. But this was back in March, April, I'd say. And just another thing here, this type of message is what we were getting. There's going to be some big thing happening. And okay, yeah. So then that's how all this started. And I only started to have doubts about Q, like the veracity of it, when the scale of the corruption and stuff started to grow. So my understanding started to grow. It's like, wow, this is a way bigger conspiracy than we initially thought. And then I thought, well, how could Trump not be involved, and etc. But there's some things I want to point out. So this is a Q post from April 29, 2018. I mentioned this before in the beginning of the movement. I'll just read this post. Be careful who you are following. Some are profiting off this movement. Some are building a big following off of this movement, only then to retreat and go mainstream. Patriots make sacrifices. Some ultimate sacrifices. Patriots are selfless. Do they ask for monthly payments to remain patriots? Think logically. To some, it's only about money. Those who would seek personal gain at the expense of others in this movement has an agenda. You decide. This is not a game. The only profit we should all be striving for is true freedom. God bless you all. Q. So at this stage, it wasn't obvious. Like, I think I was on board at this stage. And it was this type of thing. It's like everybody was working together to uncover all this evil in the world. And Q was helping us put the pieces together. And this post, like, there were some people like Jerome Corsi who, I guess after this, there was a sort of a clean out in the Q community. People we didn't trust, and it was a big rejigging of reassessing who we were getting our information from. But I point this post out because if you'll notice now in the Q movement, if you're following Q, everybody's profiting off it. And this hasn't been brought up again. I just find it interesting how this happened. So it was more legitimate, is what I'm trying to say in the beginning. It was more legitimate in the beginning of the Q movement. And I point out this post from WikiLeaks. Susie Dawson saying, I referred to QAnon today as a Pied Piper operation. What I meant by this is that the operation exists to round up people that are otherwise dangerous to the deep state because they are genuinely opposed to it, usurp time and attention, and trick them into serving its aims. And I think that's not, and WikiLeaks said this analysis unfortunately increasingly appears that it may be correct. It's pretty much what I think it is. It's pretty much they've got all these people, because as I said, all the people who were on board with the sort of knew that there was corruption and was sort of, more than the general public were aware of what was going on, got on board with the QAnon stuff because there was the promise. They'd already helped all these people, sort of the same group that had helped Donald Trump get elected, and could see the way the world was going. And then there was this source who seems to be indicating that Donald Trump, who had already done a whole bunch of things that he'd promised to do early on, he seemed to be going to deliver on these other promises, the more difficult ones, the draining the swamp, and this seemed to be part of what was going on. At the beginning, we were preparing to help because it was a bigger deal than we thought, and preparing the public for a change. Anyway, so I just point this out, this WikiLeaks thing. It's interesting. Another thing I've thought about is, it doesn't matter. So the next thing. So this is in July 23rd. So some concerned fag worried. So fag, that thing, is what the people on 8chan call each other. It's the way they love each other. So, worried about Q's absence made me type this. I don't expect Q to come back. This is in July. I don't expect Q to come back. The reason is his job here is complete. He made his last post here on 4th of July, which in itself is a message. And as a farewell gift, he gave us the biggest confirmation he possibly could that POTUS is fully on board with the plan. Realize that POTUS cannot officially recognize Q at this time, so absolute proof cannot be given, but Q came up with something that is as close to absolute proof as humanly possible without losing plausible denial. Q posted a blurry picture, blah blah blah. You can read the rest of it if you want to. But I guess I'll go into a little bit. So Q posted a blurry picture of a sideboard with a lamp. It doesn't sound like much, but Anons had soon found out the picture was reflected in a phone, and that depicted the interior of Air Force One, and blah blah blah. So it's giving you a couple of insights here. Firstly, back in July of last year, people were starting to get to the point where, like, I think I pointed this out before, we thought things were close. It's like, okay, we've uncovered this conspiracy now. Things are going to happen surely. And there are a lot of things like this. It's been this case all the way along that people have been worried, like, what's going on? Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Why is nothing happening? That was the case all the way back, at least in July, but even earlier than that. You thought, why has nothing happened yet? And the other thing is that, that posted blurry picture of a sideboard with a lamp. So one of the things that was happening early on in the movement, and it's still happening, is that there'd be these cryptic messages put out by Q, and the community would get on board to decipher them. And deciphering the Q posts was a thing, and people spent a lot of time, and I also spent a lot of time looking into that, and it was very insightful. Like, it helped develop our thinking skills, and we learned a lot of information, and it was a way for Q to give us a lot of information without saying too much, just sort of hinting in a particular direction, and then that directs everybody's attention. And because we're all looking there, we find things, and we put things together, and we got proofs. And at the beginning, it was quite an interesting experience, interesting movement to be a part of. So this is back in July. But it wasn't an organized community back then. So I point this out just as where we've come from, how the QAnon stuff started. And I don't know when I started to doubt. It was the middle of the year, last year. I think by August, I had stopped looking at the Q posts. It's like, okay, there's something, like, this is not good. Or I can't remember exactly what I was thinking, but I'd stopped and I was reading the Bible at that point. I was like, all right, I'm with God. I'm not with this stuff. And it's continued on, and the quality of the movement has gone down. It's become more mainstream. But I point out the QAnon code of ethics. So I'm just trying to show you by showing you this, sort of what Q people believe, but also just that things have become solidified. At the beginning, it wasn't organized at all. It was a bunch of critical people looking into this stuff, and I would say that the quality of Q posts was higher at that point and more believable, and we were uncovering more legitimate things. I think at this point we're going around or the Q movement, I should say, is going around in circles. But so we are anonymous. We seek no money or fame. We are autists. We never stop and never forget. We are unoffended. We reject political correctness and all of that. So it's the code of ethics. So now, just skipping ahead, I guess, to where we are now, and there was a couple of posts that I'll get to that sort of are the reason why I'm making this video. But so this Jeff Sessions thing, I find it amusing that people feel confident. They know what Sessions is or isn't doing. He's not going to announce every move he makes. That would be utterly stupid. An effective AG flies below the radar until the time is right. I've known him and his family since the 1980s. Ethical, honourable, and loyal. Despite what you hear, his nickname, while in Al, was the silent executioner. I'm sorry, Alabama is that? I don't know America, sorry. But anonymous. Supposedly this is from an anonymous person. So it's interesting what you can do being anonymous. So this person's supposedly anonymous, and yet he's known Jeff Sessions since the 80s. So he's not really anonymous. He's anonymous, but he has credibility. And that's something that has happened with anons. Initially, you were anonymous, and you didn't seek fame. Like what I said in that last thing. We seek no money or fame. But then there's all the... Anyway. But there's this belief that, okay, as I've said before, we don't know what's going on. Jeff Sessions is not going to announce the moves he makes. He's just going to do everything behind the scenes. And of course we're not going to know. That would be silly, right? And then Jeff Sessions is, of course, gone at this point. But this is sort of the attitude that people have. Yeah, we don't know what's going on. POTUS doesn't announce his moves in advance. It's all secret. And we've got to trust that. We're trusting the plan. We're in on the operation. We don't know what's going on, but we're trusting all of the people who Q is telling us to trust. And we're trusting POTUS. And now we're at, this meme Q, what must occur to allow for civilian trials? Answer. If a nation declares martial law, military authority replaces civilian authority. Under martial law, the military operates the police, courts, and legislature instead of the civilian government. And this is a good thing for Q people. The Q people want this. Q people want the military to take over and military justice to take over. This is where we're at now. Which, you need a pretty extreme circumstance to want military justice to take over, don't you? And we're there for a lot of the Q people. So what next? So there's this tweet from Either Spy. I'm just going to read it. Rumors and bad science surround 5G fearmongering. Critical thought. Would POTUS push for something that is bad for you? Are other countries in a race for this technology? The fearmongering is designed to keep progress at bay here and let your competitors advance before you. So yeah, there's this idea, like Either Spy would be another anonymous source who claims to have inside information, and who knows who they are. They're anonymous. But there's this idea now. You can see how the propaganda works, basically. So because POTUS is doing something, it must be good, right? POTUS is bringing 5G in. So even though you've heard all these bad things about 5G and how it's really harmful to your health and how it's part of the Antichrist system or whatever the negative thing you've heard about 5G, this anonymous person on the internet says it can't be bad because why would POTUS push for something that is bad for you? Because other countries are doing it. So therefore, we need to be doing it. And it's this patriotic thing, POTUS, we've got to trust POTUS, and we're patriots, so our country needs 5G. And, just point out that kind of thing that happens. There's this last post I want to read. It's a longer post. I don't know if I'll read the whole thing. It just came out 23rd, so that's yesterday. Friends, this is my take. This is an 8chan post. A lot of us here are understandably furious with Hillary, Hussein and the rest. Hussein to be Obama. But what if these traitors are merely low-hanging fruits? Q has basically already alluded to this. Strings cut. So we're not going after them anymore. Puppets are essentially victims themselves of the true deep state. Some forced to play along, threats, blackmail, others surrendering and participating for various nefarious reasons. That's another thing I should point out, is that we're not necessarily within, I guess it is now within Q, but there's this idea that these Satan worshippers, they're just victims. And to a certain extent, I suppose you could argue that they are. They're sacrificing children and they're abusing other people and they're doing all of the horrible things that they're doing, but they've had horrible things done to them too, so they're victims. Well, yes, in a sense, they are victims. But it'll be interesting to see how many of the people who are involved in this satanic nonsense end up claiming that they were themselves victims and getting off. I don't know. It seems to have already been set up that way. But it's just that, forgive your enemies. Forgive people and, pray for your enemies and that type of thing. But nevertheless, it's just interesting how it's being set up. Hillary and Obama, who were the main targets in the beginning, maybe they're just low-hanging fruits. Maybe they are themselves victims. So we're going for the bigger people now. Is China our enemy? No, nor is Iran, nor North Korea. They're all victims, forced to play worthless and irrelevant side quests, while those with superior tech, info, and control paved the way forward. 99% of humanity is honestly watching a theatre. All of these bad countries were essentially hostages, small and big, every one. In a way, humanity were enslaved. We just luckily never got to fully witness it. It's interesting how close it is, isn't it? Because Satan is we are enslaved. Satan is in control. And that's one of the fascinating things about the Q movement. On one hand, it's trying to explain, it's trying to be secular in your understanding of reality and getting so close to the truth, but because you haven't accepted God, you don't understand the full truth. A coincidence that Spygate happens at what appears to be a pivotal moment, where they're setting the stage for their endgame. Did the last roadblock, the military, spot massive irregularities? So there's a thought the military is still good, because the military is on POTUS's side. Did they have certain powers? Because they need the military, because they need to put their military justice in. Did they have certain powers they could utilize and enact? Did they have a large strategic info advantage that enabled them to resolve this peacefully, despite the shadowy government, immense reach and power? Go the military. Coincidence that the MSM is going completely insane? Coincidence that the most elite intel departments get caught defrauding the public? Coincidence that mass amounts of info is leaking about everything from aliens to trafficking? Coincidence that puppets are flying all over the world? Coincidence that every single attempt imaginable is being used to take Trump down? Coincidence that the world stage is extremely active on all fronts? Political scandals everywhere. There are no coincidences. No, there aren't. It's all being set up. It's all a game. It's all a game to make people who don't believe in God and don't understand what's actually going on. Satan manipulating everybody, the Antichrist system being set up, and the New World Order about to come in, the Luciferian religion about to be released. If you don't believe that, you need to believe that there's a secret attempt by Donald Trump and the military and an elite group of patriots and an anonymous source online and a bunch of anonymous people online to take back the world from a global cabal that's been running the world for thousands of years. That's what you need to believe if you don't believe in God. This is what happens when a set of circumstances are present. Advanced tech obtained, no oversight, everything compartmentalized. Voila, an immensely powerful shadow government that, if they desire to expand, have a path towards complete domination. Think about that. Those who already deal in warfare, murder, and crimes against humanity. Of all people, those are the ones who stumble upon the most valuable discoveries of all time. You stay here, we go there. I'm so grateful and inspired by those that are involved in liberating us. Thank you. This is the defining moment of humanity. So this is where we're at now. We started off with a bunch of autists on 4chan and then 8chan were vigorously checking every single thing that Q posted. And now we're at basically implicit trust in the face of what it seems ridiculous almost at this point to believe what the Q people currently believe. And there's a couple of other things I'll post. This is not a game, and this the light and dark playing chess, propaganda, and protests parting the Red Sea, and it's become a bit ridiculous. But I haven't mentioned it yet. I've got another couple of pictures here about sort of the secret societies in the world, just to show you sort of what you're up against trying to figure all this stuff out. So you've got whole lot of connections between all these different things: the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, and the Illuminati, and the Masons, and all the Rosicrucians, and UNESCO, ADL, all these things. And then there's another picture I'll put up of all these different connections between things. Sort of the Mystery Babylon. This whole thing, you could say, is Mystery Babylon. It's a whole bunch of confusing stuff all thrown together. And that's why I eventually, I looked into this stuff. I tried to figure it out. And I kept coming back to the point where you think you've got all the pieces. You think you've figured out the puzzle. And then you haven't. There's some new piece that comes along, because it's impossible to actually figure out what's going on. And so what happens is that you end up basically, it's what I've said in the other video, like you've got your core beliefs, and then you layer everything else on top of these core beliefs. And the core beliefs, either you're a Christian and you believe in Jesus and you believe in his death and resurrection, and you put your faith and trust in him, or you believe in something else. For the Q people, they're putting their faith in POTUS, Trump, and they're putting their faith in Q, and they're putting their faith in the military, and that's their pillars. They're trusting them. Instead of building their foundations on Jesus, instead of Jesus being their rock is POTUS. And so this is what you end up with, basically, when you implicitly trust POTUS and the Q people. You end up with this maze of mystery, complete confusion, a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't make sense, and you have to come up with really weird theories in order to explain the anomalies that don't make sense, and the fact that a whole lot of things that are said that are going to happen don't happen. It's a confusing mess, and you end up basically just blindly supporting. And you're blindly supporting at this stage. If you're supporting Trump as a Q follower at this stage, if you're supporting Trump, you're doing it without knowing anything that's going on, aren't you? You don't know what's going on. You're trusting the plan. So I just point that out. It's a brief history of the Q movement and my perspective, my involvement in it. And yeah, I hope that if you're involved in the Q movement, you realize that it's a farce. This is the New World Order. You're being manipulated. You're being taken advantage of. There's only one Savior, and his name is Jesus Christ. He died for you. He loves you. He wants you to go to him, put your trust in him. I've done some other videos, and there's a book you can read, obviously, the Bible. I recommend the King James Bible. So there we go. May Jesus bless you and lead you to the truth. Amen.